How deep is the pool typically of referees per state or even per city? 10 guys, 20 guys?
No, there's to me, there's 3 or 4 of us in Texas that can, Vegas is different because they have a lot of activity. Different places, the more activity you have, the better your officiating pool is going to be because the more experience you're going to have. So places like New York are going to have, they're going to have 5 or 6 referees that are competent. California, same way. Nevada, same way. But it's really hard to break in those jurisdictions. Texas is a little bit easier to break in because we're such a big state. We have so many small shows that the promoters don't have a lot of money. So the promoter turns around, he doesn't want to bring in 3 officials from Dallas if he's doing a show in Brownsville. I mean, that's a very costly expense. So hopefully he's able to use somebody in Brownsville or someone within 100 miles or so to come in and work that fight card.
So prior to becoming a boxing ref and official yourself, what was your general perception of referees in boxing and other sports, before and since?
Well, I have a different background because of my father's relationship with the sport, and it goes back to even my grandfather. My grandfather helped start the Dallas Golden Gloves, and all my family boxed, cousins, uncles, etc. And then the reason I got into the sport was also I knew I had limited talent, but I enjoyed being a gym rat. And I enjoyed working out, and I really enjoyed boxing. I'm kind of glad I wasn't any better because that way I opened the door for officiating. But by me hanging out with my father, I knew a lot of ring officials and the people politically associated with sanctioning organization, and that's what got me into. That was the eternal goal after probably I was 22, 23, and I wasn't going to the state Golden Gloves or regional USA box tournaments. So I kind of knew my avenue. If I wanted to be associated with the sport at a high level, was going to be a ring official.
So you said you boxed. What was your amateur record?
Oh, you don't want to go into that. I'll just let everybody think I was better than I wasn't.
Did you fight like anyone or try? Did you have an idea of who you wanted to be when you fought?
Oh, I would have loved to have been a slick boxer. To come out and fight, like a Leonard. I wasn't tall enough to be a Hearns. More like, and then, but what I realized I needed to be more of a Duran. I needed to be a bowling ball. Moving forward, I was shorter. Moving forward, throwing a lot of punches. I would have loved to have been just, like I said, a slick counter puncher. It's kind of easy to pick your shots, but it wasn't my strong suit. So what did Curtis Coates was my coach, and he told me, he goes, "You have slow hands and a weak chin. You're going to make a real good referee."
Did you ever knock anyone out? Did you ever get any stoppages?
I had a couple stoppages, sure.
How many?
Sure.
How many?
Well, more. I wouldn't say it's in the amateurs because you're wearing headgears and heavier gloves. It's more of a war of attrition. So you kind of beat somebody down, either body shots, and then you work them over. You're not getting a one-punch knockout. I wasn't that strong.
Okay. So, as a ref, how many fights would you estimate you've worked? Or maybe you know exactly how many.
I absolutely have no, when you brought that up, I started thinking, I go, so I've been refereeing for almost 30 years. So even if I've worked, you work 50 fights a year, a couple of undercards, a couple of title fights. I mean, that's 1,500 fights right there. So, probably somewhere in between 1,000 and 1,500, I don't know. Sometimes we used to in the state on these smaller shows, you judge, and if you weren't judging, you're refereeing. So you did both. And then world title fights, if you go by just world title fights, probably...
Right, that was my next question.
Probably in the 70s to 80s, but now, like we were talking about earlier, now there's so many subsidiary title fights that it diminishes the numbers of the true title fight that you might have worked. Like in comparison, you're talking about an Arthur Mercanti or a Richard Steele. If you're talking about those type of title fights, I've worked 20 or 30. But because there's silver title fights, super, non-super, they might have
regular, irregular.
Yeah, right.
We call them cubic zirconia pleather strap titles. That's
right.
What we call them.
But then, when you go to the subsidiary titles, the WBC Latino, the WBO, has one. All of them have different subsidiary titles. I've probably worked over 200, 12-round fights.
Okay. How many countries have you repped in?
35, 40. I've been real lucky.
You've seen the world.
I have seen the world. Matter of fact, there's a word called wanderlust, and it's this desire to see the world. And somebody will say something, have you been there? And I go, no, but it's on my list. So because of boxing, it has brought me so many experiences that has broadened me as a human. And it's not where a lot of people, when they travel, they go to the high points. What's enjoyable about traveling is I'm traveling with other like-minded individuals, but we go to a local place to eat, a local place to drink, to have a beer after the fight. We have local experiences, and you actually get to know the people that are there locally, and that's what makes opportunity to travel fantastic.
You get the flavor of the country or city.
And you gain respect for the country. What you end up learning, which this is very high philosophical presence, the difference between me and so many other people, we're all the same. What means a lot to us. Family, friends, worth of life. What makes us dislike each other is either religions or politics. I mean, and if people could get by that, even on the micro level to the macro level, it would make the nation get along better. We wouldn't have high, versions of the left versus the right versus, the blue versus the red. Everybody there's more middle ground than you really want to think. A lot of people don't want to think that, but there is more middle ground. So me and somebody, let's say from Cold War Russia, we're exactly the same, except he was born in Russia and I was born in the U.S.
Exactly. Who were some of your favorite referees and why? When you decided to start reffing, who maybe?
Well, I'm biased. My dad didn't get the exposure he needed, and he worked a lot of world title fights. My dad was a really good referee. He could. I learned a lot, so much from him because of him. He could read the fighter's hips on what direction they were going to move. He had an anticipation about where to be to stay in position, and because he got in more to the political side, things changed. The guys that have always been really good to me, that I look up to and I still see today, and the Richard Steeles, the Joe Cortezes, Jay Nady, Vic Dracula's are current guys. Tony Weeks, Kenny Bayless, we see each other all the time at Robert Byrd at conventions. Jack Reese is a friend. The guys that I looked up to back in the day, that you'd meet at conventions were, I did seminars with Arthur Mercanti Sr. Got a great story about that. I was with a seminar with Mercanti Sr. and Richard Steele.
Right.
And we had an hour to speak. Arthur Mercanti spoke for basically 50 minutes. Richard Steele got up and said a couple of words. I basically had a chance to say a couple words, and what I learned at that point in time, it says when you know it all, you need to retire. And Richard turned around to Arthur and he said, Arthur, it's time for you to retire.
As a ref, can you enjoy a fight as it's happening, or do you have to wait and rewatch it after the fact?
Sometimes you'll catch yourself and you'll just step back and you're like, this is a hell of a fight. This is a really great experience. So I noticed that when Pacquiao fought Barrera in San Antonio, which was a great fight. There was a fight, one of my first world title fights was Zaragoza and Morales. It was like that, and you'll catch yourself. You go, I'm pretty lucky to be here. And there's so many fights that you don't need a real strong referee to work because the fighters take care of themselves.
Right.
And basically, you're walking around and you're like in a great position to watch one hell of a fight.
Do you have any pre-fight rituals or stretch or exercise? Like you seem to be in pretty good shape still. So what do you have
always stretch. As Father Time's catching up to me, I gotta make sure I'm loose and ready to go. And yeah, usually get away. I need to step back. I try to time it where 30 minutes or so before a fight, I'll go back and stretch and just kind of go over the rules in my head, go over different situations in my head, kind of have a little bit of a ritual to go. Okay, this happens. This is how I need to react. And then get ready to get it going. And the worst part, anxiety-wise for me, is that time between getting in the ring, because usually on a bigger fight, there's a lot of time where the fighters come into the ring. They want the referee to be in there first. Fighters come into the ring, dignitaries, they sing the national anthem. That time between me stepping on that ring apron and the first bell is usually very anxious for me, because once it's going, I don't have to think, I can react.
Right.
I'm reacting to something's going on, so I just need to stay in position and react to what's happening.